They told you Richard Widmark was a gentleman, a professional, a man who kept his mouth shut and his head down. Hollywood loved that version of him. The studios promoted it. The press repeated it. But that version was carefully constructed. And 5 of the biggest names in Hollywood history knew exactly what Richard Widmark thought of them behind closed doors. Not rumors. Not gossip. Words from the people who were actually in the room. By the time this video is over, you will see classic Hollywood in a completely different light.
You can tell a good director in about 5 minutes. Doesn't take longer. If you've been around it all, you spot a director in 5 minutes.
Stay with me, because this one goes deep. Start with 2 brothers. Not on a movie set. Not at some glamorous Hollywood party. 2 boys sitting above a bakery in Princeton, Illinois. One becomes a legend. The other one doesn't make it past 37. That detail matters more than anything else in this story. Because if you want to understand why Richard Widmark had 0 patience for ego, 0 tolerance for laziness, and absolutely no respect for actors who coasted on their charm, you have to start right there. Above that bakery, with Donald. Their father Carl moved the family constantly. Traveling salesman. Always chasing the next opportunity. Eventually he bought a bakery, named it Henry's Bakery, and the family finally had a place to breathe. Richard went to Princeton High School. Played football. Became class president. Looked like a kid headed straight for a normal, stable life. Then his parents separated. His mother Ethel stayed behind and raised both boys alone until they graduated. Richard watched that. He absorbed it. Filed it somewhere deep. That kind of quiet endurance shaped everything about the man he became. He went to Lake Forest College on a scholarship, planning to become a lawyer. But then he discovered acting. And he was terrified to admit it because he thought people would laugh. He hid it. Pushed it down. But it kept pulling him back. Then he met Jean Hazelwood. Fellow drama student. Sharp, grounded, real. He never looked at another woman again. Not once. 55 years of marriage. No scandal. No rumors. In Hollywood. 55 years. That tells you everything about Richard Widmark's character before we even get to the part where Hollywood tried to break him. New York, 1938. Richard packs one bag and chases a radio opportunity a friend offered him. He lands roles fast. Moves between studios like he was born doing it. Then America enters World War II and Richard tries to enlist. They reject him. Perforated eardrum. His brother Donald gets drafted instead. Gets sent to Europe. His plane gets shot down over the Netherlands. He is the only one from his crew who survives. He spends over a year in a German prison camp. Comes home. But he is not the same. Severe headaches. Partial paralysis by 1951. Gone by December 1955. Brain tumor. 37 years old. Richard did everything he could. Spent everything he had trying to get Donald proper care. And he believed until his dying day that the government never truly understood how much his brother suffered. Now hold that image. That grief. That fury at systems and people who simply did not take things seriously enough. Because that is the lens through which Richard Widmark watched every actor who walked onto a set unprepared. Every star who showed up late. Every performer who thought charm was a substitute for commitment. He did not just dislike those people. He found them personally offensive. 1947. A 20th Century Fox executive named Darryl Zanuck offers Richard a role that will either make him or embarrass him completely. A violent, unhinged killer named Tommy Udo in Kiss of Death. The director Henry Hathaway looks at Richard and says he does not fit the part. Looks too smart. Too refined. Too high a forehead to be a believable killer. Zanuck overrules him. Hathaway is furious. Makes filming miserable for Richard at every turn. And Richard, who only wanted the role because it was being shot in New York, walks onto that set and in his very first scene ever filmed on a motion picture, pushes an elderly woman in a wheelchair down a full flight of stairs and laughs. Not a normal laugh. A laugh that made audiences grip their armrests. Academy Award nomination. Golden Globe. 7-year Fox contract. All from one scene. His very first. He joked afterward that he thought acting was easy and had not won anything since. But privately, when he saw himself on that screen for the first time, he said he felt like shooting himself. The performance horrified him. But the audience was completely and utterly hooked. Fox had a weapon. And they knew it. Now here is where the story shifts. And this is the part most people never talk about. Richard Widmark was not just disciplined. He was almost allergic to anything he considered fraudulent. Fake professionalism. Performed commitment. Stars who showed up and expected the camera to do the work for them. He worked with Sidney Poitier on No Way Out in 1950. Richard was forced by the studio to play a vicious racist named Ray Biddle. A role he did not want. A role that made him deeply uncomfortable. After every single intense scene, Richard would walk over to Poitier and quietly say, "Sid, you know this is just acting, right?" Poitier understood completely. They became close friends. And Poitier later said that Richard Widmark was the first person in all of Hollywood to invite him to dinner. First one. In the entire industry. That is who Richard Widmark was when the cameras were off. Now let us talk about who made him furious when the cameras were on. 5 names. 5 actors. 5 situations that Richard Widmark carried with him for the rest of his career. These are not internet theories. These come from crew members, co-stars, and people who watched it happen firsthand. Frank Sinatra is first. 1968. The Detective. 2 of Hollywood's most recognizable names sharing a screen. And Richard Widmark is quietly, professionally losing his mind. Sinatra shows up when he feels like it. Demands scenes be shot in one take regardless of quality. Treats the entire production like a minor inconvenience between more important engagements. One crew member on that set later said that Richard believed Frank was all charisma and zero commitment. To Widmark, acting was not entertainment. It was a responsibility. To the script. To the audience. To every person who bought a ticket. Sinatra treated it like a lounge performance. Widmark never forgot it. Marlon Brando is next. They never actually worked together directly. But Widmark watched Brando from a distance and what he saw made him tighten his jaw. The method acting chaos. The deliberate refusal to memorize lines. The constant improvisation that Brando's supporters called genius and Widmark called disrespectful. He was once quoted saying some actors need chaos to create. He preferred focus. Everyone who heard that quote knew exactly who he was talking about. That quiet precision was sharper than anything he ever said in a film. Tony Curtis in 1964 on the set of The Long Ships. This one was visible to everyone. Curtis treated the set like a personal runway. More time in the makeup chair than with the script. Concerned with angles, lighting, how his jaw looked in a particular frame. Widmark came to work. Curtis came to be seen. One production assistant said Widmark did not hate Curtis for who he was. He hated him for who he pretended to be. Style performing as substance. To Widmark that was unforgivable. Robert Mitchum is the one that might surprise you most. Because Mitchum was talented. Genuinely talented. And Widmark knew it. That almost made it worse. Mitchum openly bragged about how little he prepared. Famously said he just showed up, hit his mark, and said the lines. Thought it was charming. Thought it made him cool. Widmark once muttered to a friend after watching Mitchum on screen, "You do not coast through greatness." That sentence was not said with admiration. That was a man who had watched his brother come home from a German prison camp and slowly disappear. You do not coast. You do not phone it in. You show up and you work. And then there is Kirk Douglas. This is the most complicated one on the list. Because Douglas was not lazy. Was not vain in the way Curtis was. Was not careless like Mitchum. Douglas was intense, commanding, and completely dominant in every scene he entered. And that was exactly the problem. Widmark believed Douglas stole scenes deliberately. Manufactured moments of theatrical brilliance specifically designed to pull focus from everyone else on screen. The booming voice. The jaw. The performances that somehow always seemed slightly bigger than the film required. There is a story, never fully confirmed but repeated by enough people to carry weight, that Widmark turned down a major role specifically because it required him to share the screen with Douglas. His reported reason was simple. There is only room for one storm in a scene and Kirk brings the whole hurricane. That is not hatred. That is a man who understood his own power and refused to be drowned out by someone else's ego. Here is what you need to understand about all 5 of those names. Richard Widmark never went to the press. Never fed a columnist. Never gave an interview where he openly attacked another actor by name. He was too disciplined for that. Too private. Too much his mother's son to air personal grievances in public. But the people around him saw it. The crew members who watched his face when certain names came up. The co-stars who noticed how he carried himself differently on certain sets. The friends he spoke to quietly, not for publication, not for posterity, just because he needed to say it out loud to someone who understood. He appeared in over 70 films. Westerns, war pictures, courtroom dramas, crime thrillers. He played Jim Bowie in John Wayne's The Alamo after Wayne told him he was not big enough for the role. He looked at Wayne and said, "I will be." And he was. He played alongside Spencer Tracy, Gregory Peck, James Stewart, Marilyn Monroe, Lauren Bacall. He described Marilyn as a wounded bird who hid in her dressing room for hours and then somehow looked extraordinary on screen. He said she never even flirted with him. He said it like it was a compliment to her focus, not a complaint about her indifference. By 1987 he admitted that making movies simply irritated him. Said he had only a few years left and did not want to spend 12 hours on a set to capture 2 minutes of footage. He was 72. He had earned that opinion. Then in 1990 his wife Jean was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. He stopped. Completely. No negotiations. No farewell tour. He stepped away from the industry that had defined his entire adult life, and he went home and he took care of her. For 7 years he watched the woman he had loved since Lake Forest College slowly disappear. He fulfilled one final commitment in 1991, one film, and then he was done. Jean passed away on March 2, 1997 in Santa Barbara. Richard sold the ranch they had shared. Could not stay there without her. 2.5 years later he remarried a longtime family friend named Susan Blanchard, and they settled quietly in Roxbury, Connecticut. In 2002 he was inducted into the National Cowboy Hall of Fame. By 2007 his health was declining. A fractured vertebrae slowed him down further. On March 24, 2008, at 93 years old, Richard Widmark passed away peacefully at home in Roxbury. Here is what nobody tells you about Richard Widmark's frustration with those 5 actors. It was never really about them. It was about Donald. About a man who survived a German prison camp and came home to die slowly in a country that did not fully recognize his sacrifice. It was about Ethel, who stayed behind and raised 2 boys alone without complaint. It was about a 4-year-old kid sitting in a dark cinema 2 or 3 times a week with his Scottish grandmother watching Tom Mix ride across the screen and feeling something wake up inside him that he could not explain and could not ignore. Richard Widmark took acting seriously because everything in his life taught him that the things worth doing are worth doing completely. You do not coast. You do not perform commitment while actually withholding it. You show up and you give everything, or you do not show up at all. The 5 names on that list did not make that mistake in his eyes just once. They made it as a lifestyle. And that, to Richard Widmark, was the one thing he could never forgive. The scariest part of all this is not that Richard Widmark hated those 5 actors. The scariest part is how many people in Hollywood knew exactly why he did and quietly agreed with him. He was not the only one. He was just the one disciplined enough never to say it on the record. If this story hit different than you expected, you already know what to do. Subscribe. Share this with someone who thinks they know everything about classic Hollywood. And check out our other videos because we are just getting started pulling back the curtain on the golden age. See you in the next one.